Since May of 2020, myself and thousands of families have demanded answers and accountability into why those deadly decisions were made. The former governor, Andrew Cuomo, his administration, and the New York State Health Department tried to cover it up.
At 56, the tragedy of Janice Dean's life is beyond heartbreaking. For decades, she has been the calm voice on morning television, translating hurricanes, blizzards, and chaos into something viewers could understand before their first cup of coffee. Yet, behind that steady delivery has been a quieter reality, a tragic reality. And it's not a single moment of life either, but the accumulation of them, layered over years of appearing composed. Today, we'll take a peek behind the curtain. Let's start from the beginning. Breakthrough at Fox News. In 2004, Janice Dean found her place at Fox News. She had spent years in Canadian radio and regional television. Small stations, early morning shifts that began before sunrise, and weather segments delivered to audiences that rarely saw the presenter but depended on the forecast. It was a grind defined by repetition and discipline, not visibility. When Fox News hired her as a meteorologist in 2004, she was stepping from local cadence into national acceleration. Her assignment placed her immediately into one of the most watched morning programs in America, Fox and Friends. Broadcast from New York and reaching millions of households before 8 a.m. Eastern Time. The show itself functioned less like a traditional broadcast and more like a live newsroom pulse, shifting between politics, breaking news, and weather updates that often carried immediate real-world stakes. Dean's role was not decorative. She was responsible for translating National Hurricane Center data, satellite imagery, and severe weather alerts into language that could move in real time with the broadcast's pace. Within months, she became a regular morning fixture. She would appear multiple times a week, often during peak storm cycles when the Atlantic hurricane season intensified. That timing proved critical. The mid-2000s were one of the most active hurricane periods in recorded Atlantic history. In 2004 alone, storms like Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean struck with enough force to make the year one of the costliest on record. The following year, 2005, escalated further into meteorological history with Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, three major hurricanes forming within weeks of each other. Dean's role on air during these cycles was continuous live interpretation of evolving storm paths, evacuation zones, and landfall probabilities, often delivered while the storms were still forming in the Atlantic basin. These broadcasts carried a sense of immediacy that blurred the line between weather reporting and emergency communication. As her presence increased, so did her recognizability. Viewers began associating her with accuracy and consistency under pressure. Unlike many rotating meteorologists on national television, she remained a stable figure during repeated storm cycles. Informal labels began circulating among viewers and media colleagues. The Weather Machine, and later, the Weather Queen. These were not official branding decisions. They emerged organically from audience perception, especially during hurricanes when her segments aired multiple times per day. Behind that growing visibility, Fox News itself invested heavily in live reporting formats where anchors, political commentators, and meteorologists appeared in rapid succession. Dean's segment became a structural component of that ecosystem. Her delivery style, direct, calm, and slightly conversational, stood out in a format that often favored confrontation and urgency. This contrast helped stabilize her presence on screen, giving viewers a predictable voice during unpredictable weather cycles. By the late 2000s, she became part of the emotional architecture of morning television. Weather reporting, especially during hurricane seasons, began with anticipation, escalated into threat assessment, and ended with impact reports that often included destruction, displacement, and recovery. Dean's consistency across these phases reinforced her dual identity, both a technical interpreter of meteorological data and a familiar on-air guide through disruptive events. At the same time, her Canadian Broadcasting Foundation continued to shape her approach. Canadian local media environments, particularly in radio, emphasize clarity over performance, often requiring presenters to sustain long, uninterrupted segments with minimal production support. That training translated directly into her Fox News role, where live weather coverage could extend unpredictably. But behind the scenes, she was battling other troubles, and no amount of training could have prepared her for them. The silent storm, multiple sclerosis diagnosis. In 2005, at the exact moment Janice Dean's television career was beginning to stabilize at Fox News, something inside her body began to fail. It started with an unfamiliar numbness in her legs, a creeping fatigue that did not match her workload, and a strange sensory dulling that came and went without warning. As a meteorologist trained to detect patterns in chaos, she initially tried to rationalize it the only way she knew how. Stress, long shifts, and the relentless schedule of live morning television in New York City. But unlike weather systems, this pattern refused to align with logic. The symptoms escalated until they became impossible to ignore. Neurological testing eventually confirmed the diagnosis: multiple sclerosis, a chronic autoimmune disease in which the immune system attacks the myelin sheath, protecting nerve fibers in the central nervous system. This disruption interferes with communication between the brain and the body, producing symptoms that can include numbness, vision impairment, loss of coordination, and profound fatigue. For many patients, the disease follows a relapsing-remitting pattern, where periods of relative stability are interrupted by sudden flare-ups. For Dean, the timing of the diagnosis created a second, quieter crisis. She was working in a high-visibility broadcast environment where consistency of appearance and on-air reliability were treated as professional currency. According to her later public accounts, she was advised at the time to keep her condition private. What followed was a period of dual existence. On one level, she continued appearing on national television each morning, delivering weather forecasts during active hurricane seasons and severe weather cycles that demanded precision and composure. On another level, she began medical treatment for a lifelong condition that would require ongoing management rather than resolution. Multiple sclerosis has no cure, and treatment typically focuses on reducing the frequency and severity of relapses through disease-modifying therapies. For Dean, this meant integrating medical care into a schedule already packed with early call times, live broadcasts, and unpredictable breaking weather coverage. The mid-2000s were not a quiet backdrop for that internal adjustment. The Atlantic hurricane seasons of 2004 and 2005 were among the most active in recorded history, producing a sequence of high-impact storms that repeatedly placed weather coverage at the center of national attention. Hurricanes such as Katrina in August of 2005 reshaped not only American infrastructure, but also the way weather reporting was consumed on television, with live forecasts becoming part of the emergency response ecosystem. Dean was on air during this era of heightened meteorological urgency, interpreting evolving storm data while privately managing a diagnosis that affected the very system, her nervous system, responsible for her clarity and stamina. The tension between visibility and concealment became one of the defining pressures of her early multiple sclerosis years. The disease is often described in medical literature as unpredictable, precisely because it does not progress in a linear fashion. A patient may appear fully functional for extended periods and then experience sudden neurological impairment without warning. That unpredictability creates a psychological burden as significant as the physical symptoms, particularly in professions that rely on consistency of public performance. In Dean's case, the expectation of composure on live television collided with a condition that could, at any time, alter sensation, balance, or energy levels. Despite this, she remained on air. Disease-modifying therapies for multiple sclerosis often involve long-term medication strategies designed to slow progression rather than eliminate symptoms. These treatments require monitoring, adjustment, and tolerance of side effects that can include fatigue and immune suppression. Balancing that with the demands of early morning broadcast television created a private discipline that never appeared on camera, managing health around a schedule that does not pause for illness. Over time, the silence itself became part of the story. What began as medical discretion gradually evolved into a more complex question of visibility. For years, she continued to work without publicly disclosing the full scope of her condition, maintaining the professional separation between personal health and public role. But multiple sclerosis is not a static diagnosis, and neither is public life. As awareness of chronic illness and workplace transparency increased in broader media culture, Dean eventually chose to speak openly about her condition, reframing it not as a limitation to be hidden, but as a reality to be acknowledged. That shift transformed her public identity in a subtle but lasting way. She did not leave broadcasting. Instead, she incorporated lived experience into the role. Pandemic grief and the nursing home policy controversy. Then, in March 2020, New York became one of the global epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic. And inside that rapidly collapsing system of hospitals, nursing homes, and emergency directives, another private tragedy unfolded for Janice Dean. Her husband's parents, Mickey and Dee Newman, were living in separate New York nursing and assisted living facilities when the virus spread through institutional care settings across the state. Within weeks of each other, both died in the spring of 2020. But these were not just fateful occurrences to her. The policy at the center of the controversy was a March 25, 2020, directive issued by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration requiring nursing homes to accept patients discharged from hospitals, including individuals who had tested positive for COVID-19. The policy remained in effect for approximately 46 days before being rescinded in May 2020. During that period, thousands of recovering or still infectious patients were placed into long-term care facilities housing elderly and medically vulnerable residents. The decision was later scrutinized heavily by lawmakers, journalists, and state investigators. Dean publicly argued that her father-in-law had been transferred within a facility where COVID exposure risks were elevated, and that her mother-in-law later contracted the virus in her care environment before being hospitalized and dying. As public debate intensified, so did scrutiny of New York's official reporting on nursing home fatalities. Early figures released by state authorities were later revised upward after audits and investigative reporting revealed discrepancies between deaths recorded within facilities and deaths of residents who had been transferred to hospitals. A 2021 New York State Attorney General report found that the state had undercounted nursing home deaths by thousands, estimating that total fatalities among nursing home residents were significantly higher than initially reported. Supporters of the Cuomo administration and various commentators attempted to frame Dean as unqualified to speak on public health policy, often reducing her role to her TV persona. Despite the backlash, Dean's public statements remained consistent. She repeatedly emphasized that thousands of elderly residents across New York nursing homes were not abstract data points, but individuals whose deaths required accountability and explanation. Dean also increasingly turned to Twitter, now X, not just as a place to mourn publicly, but as a battlefield. What began as emotional posts about the deaths of her in-laws evolved into direct confrontations with journalists, Cuomo allies, political commentators, and even state officials. One of her most widely circulated moments came after critics dismissed her involvement by referring to her as just a weather girl. Dean fired back publicly, writing variations of the same argument repeatedly across interviews and tweets, that losing family members gave her every right to speak. In one widely shared response during 2020, she wrote, "I may be a weather woman, but I know when something stinks." The line spread rapidly across conservative media circles because it condensed her broader message into a direct challenge against political gatekeeping. Her exchanges with Cuomo defenders became personal after New York's nursing home death reporting came under investigation. Dean repeatedly accused the administration of hiding numbers and avoiding accountability. In one tweet directed at Cuomo's orbit, she wrote, "My family deserved better. Thousands of families deserved better." In another, she accused state officials of treating elderly deaths like collateral damage, language that intensified the emotional force of the debate, but also drew criticism from people who felt she was oversimplifying a chaotic public health emergency. The conflict escalated further when Cuomo aide Melissa DeRosa admitted during a private call with Democratic lawmakers in February 2021 that the administration had delayed releasing nursing home data because they feared it would be used against us politically. Once that recording became public, Dean aggressively amplified it online. She tweeted directly at Cuomo multiple times, asking variations of the same question. Why did you hide the numbers? And why were families lied to? Those posts were shared tens of thousands of times and helped cement her role as one of Cuomo's most visible media critics outside traditional political circles. She also sparred with journalists she believed were protecting Cuomo's image during the governor's peak popularity in 2020. At the time, Cuomo was receiving glowing national coverage, appearing frequently on major networks, publishing a leadership book, and even receiving an International Emmy Founders Award for his televised COVID briefings. Dean openly mocked portions of that media treatment. In one tweet, reacting to Cuomo's Emmy recognition, she wrote, "Maybe he can put the Emmy next to the photos of our dead loved ones." That quote became one of her most controversial social media statements because supporters viewed it as raw truth, while critics called it exploitative and inflammatory. Some reporters and commentators accused her of becoming politically partisan rather than staying focused on personal loss. Dean rejected that framing repeatedly. In interviews and social posts, she insisted the issue was not Republican versus Democrat, but transparency versus concealment. One of her recurring themes online was that grieving families were being erased from the conversation while politicians and media figures protected reputations. These were human beings, not numbers, she said. The political dimension of the controversy expanded further when Dean was initially scheduled to testify before New York state lawmakers investigating pandemic-era nursing home policies. But then, she claimed that she had been removed from the witness list for a New York legislative hearing on nursing home deaths. She tweeted that lawmakers were uncomfortable with her participation, presenting the decision as evidence that certain officials wanted to avoid emotional testimony from affected families. That accusation triggered another wave of online debate, with supporters claiming she was being silenced and critics arguing that hearings should prioritize policy experts over media personalities. By 2021, Dean's Twitter presence had effectively transformed from broadcaster commentary into activist-style advocacy. She was no longer tweeting mainly about the weather, broadcasting schedules, or family life. Instead, her feed became dominated by COVID-era accountability, nursing home fatalities, investigative updates, and attacks on Cuomo's administration. Critics accused her of weaponizing personal grief inside a hyper-polarized media environment, especially because her criticism aligned with broader anti-Cuomo narratives promoted by conservative outlets. Supporters argued the opposite. Meanwhile, Cuomo's approval ratings surged dramatically during this period. Polling in 2020 showed his favorability climbing above 70% in New York, including support from many independents and Democrats who viewed him as calm and decisive during the crisis. The media attention expanded beyond politics into celebrity-level visibility. Cuomo appeared repeatedly on CNN in highly publicized interviews with his brother, anchor Chris Cuomo, where the two joked on air while discussing the pandemic. Late-night television hosts praised his communication style. Magazines and newspapers described him as a national leadership figure during a moment of federal uncertainty. In October 2020, he released a book titled American Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic, presenting his administration's response as a case study in crisis management while the pandemic was still ongoing. Then came the awards. In November 2020, Cuomo received the International Emmy Founders Award from the International Academy of Television, Arts and Sciences for what organizers described as his masterful use of television to inform and calm the public during the pandemic. It was one of the defining symbols of how dramatically his public image had risen. However, at the same time, criticism surrounding nursing home deaths was already building beneath the surface. In January 2021, the situation escalated sharply when New York Attorney General Letitia James released a report estimating that the state may have undercounted nursing home resident deaths by as much as 50% in some facilities. The report stated that data omissions created an incomplete understanding of the pandemic's impact on long-term care settings. That finding triggered a wave of scrutiny from both state lawmakers and national media outlets. The political damage deepened further in February 2021 after reports emerged that senior Cuomo aide Melissa DeRosa had privately told Democratic lawmakers the administration had delayed releasing nursing home data. Once details of that conversation became public, critics seized on it as evidence. Federal investigators soon requested information related to nursing home reporting practices, while state legislators launched additional inquiries into how death totals had been compiled and presented publicly. Media coverage shifted rapidly. The same networks and publications that had once celebrated Cuomo's pandemic communication now began focusing on allegations of withheld information, intimidation tactics, and efforts to shape public perception during a deadly crisis. And, just like that, his image had transformed. From a pandemic-era hero to an embattled governor under multiple investigations, Cuomo ultimately resigned as governor of New York in August 2021. This was little solace to Dean, though. Long-term struggle, health decline, and enduring public voice. By the 2010s, Janice Dean was living two lives at once. On television, she remained a familiar face on Fox News, delivering weather forecasts during hurricanes, blizzards, and national storm emergencies from New York studios. Off-camera, she was battling multiple sclerosis, a chronic autoimmune disease she had been diagnosed with in 2005. Dean later described how exhausting it was to wake up each day unsure how her body would respond. While viewers saw consistency on screen, she privately managed treatment schedules, neurological symptoms, and periods of intense fatigue that could make ordinary physical tasks difficult. Despite this, she continued working in one of the most demanding environments in television, where live broadcasts begin before sunrise and require constant performance under pressure. Over time, she became increasingly open about the realities of living with MS, emphasizing that the fatigue associated with the disease is neurological. By the mid-2020s, Dean had begun taking periodic breaks from broadcasting for health-related reasons. Even during those absences, she continued speaking publicly through interviews and social media, connecting her personal struggles to broader conversations about resilience, chronic illness visibility, and long-term adaptation. Resilience continues to define her. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.